The diplomatic chamber aboard the Virellan cruiser was built for beings twice the size of an average human. Ceiling lights pulsed a soft green, casting long shadows across the polished obsidian floor. At the far end of the chamber, a row of towering, translucent Virellan officials sat behind an elevated platform that looked more like an altar than a bench. Michael Anders stood in the center of the room, arms folded, trying not to shift his weight too obviously between his feet. He'd been standing there for 23 minutes, he'd counted, and the artificial gravity was just a touch heavier than Earth standard. Enough to make his knees ache. His cat, Muffin, sat calmly in a carrier at his feet, her green eyes half-lidded with boredom. Occasionally, she yawned. The Virellans flinched every time. The lead official, a high-ranking envoy named Vellet, leaned forward. Its elongated face, pale with streaks of blue light running through its skin, studied Michael with something between suspicion and awe. "We have reviewed the scan footage," Vellet said, its voice warbling somewhere between a whisper and a chime. "There is no doubt, the life form you refer to as Muffin exhibited predator behavior." Michael blinked. She licked her paw and stared at a plant. Vellet tilted its head. "The plant in question is a rare Virellan bloom, known for its sensitivity to perceived threats. Upon observation, the bloom withered." Michael chuckled and bent down to open the carrier. Muffin stepped out cautiously, tail high, and immediately walked in a circle before curling up on his boot. "She's a lap warmer, not a monster." A low murmur erupted from the officials. One of them, a younger Virellan named Virellans, rose abruptly. "We have laws regarding apex predators. The presence of such a being aboard a diplomatic vessel is a breach of interspecies protocol." Michael raised an eyebrow. "She weighs 9 pounds. You could crush her with one of your chairs." Virellans' expression didn't change, but a ripple of blue passed through his skin. "She stared down a Growler hound in the corridor. The hound fled." Michael nodded. "Yeah, that sounds about right." "She doesn't like dogs." Vellet tapped a long finger on the surface of the bench. "We have summoned you here to determine whether this creature poses a threat to interstellar peace." Michael sighed and picked Muffin up. She grumbled but didn't resist. "She sleeps 20 hours a day and the other 4 are spent knocking pens off my desk. If that's a threat to galactic order, then I guess we're all doomed." Vellet stood slowly. "We must investigate further. You and the feline will remain aboard for observation." "Observation?" Michael frowned. "You're putting us under arrest." "No, supervised evaluation. You will be escorted to quarters 7. Your meals and basic needs will be provided. The feline will be monitored." Michael opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. There were 3 Virellan guards flanking the entrance now. He looked down at Muffin, who was licking her paw without a care in the galaxy. "Fine, but I want a window." Quarters 7 weren't bad. Sparse, sure, but Michael had stayed in worse hotel rooms on Earth. There was a bed that adjusted to his weight, a desk, and a small viewing port that overlooked the reddish swirls of a nearby gas giant. A shallow bowl of nutrient paste had been set out for Muffin, who sniffed it, sneezed, and promptly ignored it. Michael lay on the bed with his feet propped up on the wall. "You just had to stare at the fancy flower, didn't you?" Muffin hopped onto his chest and curled up without comment. The door chimed. Michael sat up as the panel slid open with a low hiss. Virellans stepped in cautiously, holding a translucent tablet. "You have been assigned a liaison," he said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "You?" Virellans hesitated. "Yes, I volunteered. I wish to understand this creature." Michael smirked. "Good luck." "I've lived with her for 6 years and still don't understand her." Virellans approached Muffin slowly, crouching beside the bed. Muffin opened one eye and stared directly at him. "I sense intensity," Virellans said. "She's judging you. Judging, you know, analyzing your worth. Deciding if you deserve to exist." Virellans stood abruptly. "That is highly concerning." Michael laughed. "Relax. She's doing that to everyone, all the time." The first incident happened 3 days later. Michael was in the small hygiene unit brushing his teeth when he heard a loud crash. He rushed out to find Muffin perched on the desk, tail flicking in satisfaction. On the floor lay Frall's tablet cracked in half. It was displaying a video of Virellan bloom reactions, Frall said from the doorway. She approached it and struck it. Michael held up his toothbrush. You were playing videos of that flower she hates? I was attempting to gauge her response. Well, now you know. This is the 4th item she has destroyed. She's not destroying them, she's editing your decor. Frall stared at him. She is a danger to technology. She's a danger to unattended objects, and maybe your ego. Frall didn't leave. Instead, he sat on the floor and observed Muffin as she now pawed at the corner of a blanket. She exhibits complex behavioral patterns, territorial aggression, object displacement. Selective attention, Michael nodded. Yep, she's a cat. Frall looked up. There is a term we use for such beings among Virellans, predators who masquerade as companions. Michael laughed. She's not masquerading. She just is what she is. By the end of the first week, Muffin had managed to shut down the chamber lights twice, triggered a false fire alarm, and somehow accessed the room's temperature controls. Each time, Frall documented the incident as strategic environmental manipulation. Michael called it boredom. He was on his 3rd cup of synthetic coffee when Vellet summoned him again. You must understand, Vellet began, the behavior of this feline continues to disrupt standard operations. Michael crossed his arms. She's not trying to disrupt anything. She's just doing what cats do. She incapacitated a Drillarian scout with a single swipe. He tried to pick her up without permission. He required dermal regeneration. Sounds about right. Vellet leaned closer. We are concerned this creature is not merely a domestic animal. It may be an undeclared biological weapon. Michael nearly dropped his cup. A what? An autonomous, unpredictable entity with strategic capabilities. She sleeps in the sun and attacks laser pointers. Precisely. Cunning. Michael laughed again. She's not cunning. She's lazy. Vellet didn't look convinced. The next week, Michael was allowed to walk the internal gardens under escort. Muffin rode on his shoulder, her eyes wide as she watched the glowing flora sway in artificial wind. A security drone buzzed too close. In a flash, Muffin leapt from his shoulder and struck the drone's sensor array. The drone spun wildly before crashing into a bush. Frall, who had joined them, gasped. She neutralized it, Michael sighed. No, she pounced on a flying thing. That's literally all it takes. She responded faster than trained personnel. She's a cat. The situation escalated when Muffin vanished. Michael searched every corner of Quarters 7. Nothing. Guards were alerted. Internal scans initiated. For 4 hours, Muffin was off-grid. Then Vellet summoned him to the control deck. On the main screen, Muffin sat atop the central console, tail draped over a lever. The ship was locked in a diagnostic loop because her paw was resting on a critical override. She infiltrated restricted systems, Vellet said. Michael pinched the bridge of his nose. She climbed into a vent and sat on something warm. She disabled our navigational AI. She's a cat. Vellet's tone grew quiet. We are left with a decision: remove her from the vessel or classify her as a sentient agent. Michael stared. You're kidding. She alters her environment, resists control, and selects targets. That meets 3 criteria for emergent intelligence. Michael opened his mouth, then shut it. Muffin blinked slowly on the screen and began to groom her tail. 2 days later, Muffin was issued a provisional identity tag and restricted zone clearance. Michael had to sign 7 declarations and agree to a monthly behavioral evaluation. Frall approached him in the corridor. The council has decided not to expel her. But she must be monitored. As long as I get my coffee and she gets her naps, you'll be fine. Frall hesitated. There are some who believe she is merely the beginning, that humans have cultivated a species of miniature predators for companionship. Michael chuckled. You mean cats? Yes. Are there more? Michael grinned. Oh yeah, millions. Frall's skin paled. You live among them, they live among us. Frall didn't reply. Muffin pawed at his boot. He picked her up. She's a lap warmer, he said again. Not a monster. Frall nodded slowly. Perhaps, but she is. Unique. She's just a cat. She is not just anything. The diagnostic lab was kept at a steady 22 degrees Celsius, a compromise between Virellan thermal regulation and human comfort. Michael sat on one of the low benches near the wall, watching as Muffin tiptoed across a pressure-sensitive floor grid, unbothered by the blinking sensors embedded in the tiles. A thin band of bioluminescent blue traced her path, something the lab techs had added to track movement. It was the third day of her sentient behavior assessment. "She has ignored all the stimuli we've introduced," said Telv, one of the senior researchers, his mandibles twitching with what Michael had learned to identify as academic frustration. "The sound array, the kinetic bait, the pheromone diffusers, she simply stares at them. She's waiting to see if any of it's worth her time," Michael said, arms crossed. "She's got standards." Telv turned his compound eyes toward him. "What are those standards? Can you define them?" "No." "That's part of the charm." "Deeply inefficient," Telv muttered, tapping something into his console with a claw tip. "We've had more measurable response from foliage." Michael shrugged. "That's probably a compliment from her point of view." Muffin finally stopped, sat near a vent, and began washing her face methodically with one paw. One of the assistants, a young insectoid named Priel, leaned closer to the monitor and paused the footage. "She avoided every motion-sensitive tile," Priel said. "She didn't trigger a single one. She walked in a straight line," Michael said. "Exactly." Priel's antennae twitched. "She identified the inactive path. We randomized the active tiles." Michael blinked. "You're saying she solved your maze?" "She didn't even sniff around," Telv added. "Just walked through it like she'd memorized the pattern, which we changed 5 times before she entered." Michael looked over at Muffin, who had now curled into a compact loaf and closed her eyes. "She probably heard the relay hum. You're using power cycling, right?" Telv stared at him. "How would she know that? She used to turn off my alarm clock by sitting on the power strip." "I only figured it out because she'd wait until 5 minutes before it was supposed to go off." There was a long silence. Telv finally said, "That suggests a concept of time." Michael frowned. "No, it suggests she doesn't like being woken up." Priel leaned in toward Telv. "We should run the temporal association test." Telv tapped a claw against his console. "Fine, but we're isolating variables this time, no human presence." Michael stood. "You want to separate her? She will be monitored constantly," Telv said. "There is no risk. She doesn't like closed doors. She is not being confined, merely relocated." Michael pointed at the monitor. "She'll know, you realize, she always knows." Priel lifted Muffin from the floor with practiced care, her soft body draped across his arms like a plush scarf. She didn't struggle, but her ears turned slightly back. They left the lab and Michael remained behind, arms folded, staring at the monitor. The screen now showed the empty room, quiet and lifeless without her in it. 2 hours passed. Michael sat in silence, sipping something that vaguely resembled tea. The lab techs rotated in and out, checking readings, adjusting light levels, muttering about data thresholds. Telv didn't look up from his console. Then came the alert. "Containment breach in observation cell B," an automated voice announced over the intercom. Everyone froze. "Wasn't that where you moved her?" Michael asked. Priel had already sprinted to the door. Telv followed, muttering something about redundancy failure. Michael was right behind them. They arrived to find the door to cell B wide open, not forced, not damaged. Open. Inside, Muffin was perched atop the central air exchanger, tail flicking slowly. The red sensor light above the vent blinked in error. "She triggered a system override," Telv said, astonished. From inside the room, Michael bent down to check the panel. "You had a heat sensor on the door latch." "Yes." "She probably laid against it long enough to fool the shutdown protocol." Priel stared. "That would require an understanding of thermal thresholds." Michael looked up. "Or she just wanted out." Muffin jumped down and wound between Michael's legs like nothing had happened. Telv looked as if someone had unplugged his brain. Later that evening, Michael was summoned back to the diplomatic chamber. The lighting had been dimmed, And instead of the full council, only Vellet was present along with a being Michael hadn't met before. Tall, pale, and with a cascade of thin metallic spines running down its back, the newcomer stood with a posture more military than administrative. "This is Commander Sorrel," Vellet said. "He oversees security protocols aboard Virellan vessels." Michael nodded. "So you're the one who thinks my cat's trying to hack your ship?" Sorrel's voice was low and cool. "We have encountered no other species capable of breaching 4 distinct containment layers without tools. She didn't breach anything. She loafed her way out. Her actions display intention." Michael gestured at Muffin, who was now sitting on the floor licking her shoulder. "She's not a spy." "She's a nap enthusiast." Sorrel stepped forward. "I've reviewed the footage. She avoids surveillance, exploits environmental patterns, and adapts behavior rapidly. I am not convinced she is unintelligent." "No one said she was unintelligent," Michael replied. "She's just not doing it on purpose." "She's a chaos organism, like gravity or toddlers." Vellet raised one hand. "This is no longer a discussion of classification. The matter concerns containment." Michael straightened. "She's not a pathogen. She has disrupted more internal systems than a standard infiltration drone," Sorrel said. "Our protocol is clear. Unidentified agents demonstrating disruptive capacity must be quarantined." Michael's jaw tightened. "Then put me in there with her." Vellet hesitated. "That is not necessary." "She'll panic if she's isolated again," Michael said flatly. "You want her cooperative." "I go with her." Sorrel looked at Vellet. Vellet gave a slow nod. They were escorted to a new chamber larger, lined with soft panels and low lighting. A single observation lens blinked quietly in the corner. Muffin prowled the perimeter once, then leapt onto the cot and settled in. Michael sat beside her. "You know you're causing an interstellar incident." Muffin purred faintly. An hour passed, then another. Michael dozed briefly, woken only when Muffin climbed onto his chest and curled up. The observation lens glowed faintly red. He stared at it until his eyes blurred. The next morning, Priel entered with a tray. Fresh nutrient paste for Muffin, something vaguely resembling eggs for Michael. "She refused to eat anything while you were gone," Priel said quietly. Michael rubbed his eyes. "She's picky." "No." "She waited by the door the entire time." Michael looked down at the cat now sprawled across his lap, purring softly. "She's got priorities." Priel hesitated. "I've been reviewing communications from Earth. There are billions of these creatures. Tens of billions, probably. And humans live with them, usually willingly." Priel stared. "Are you not concerned?" Michael chuckled. "Every now and then, but you get used to the glaring." Priel looked at Muffin again. "I believe we may need to rewrite several sections of our sapience metrics. Start with does not care what you think. That's a good baseline." Priel nodded solemnly. As the door closed behind him, Michael leaned back on the cot, Muffin tucked securely on his chest. "Galactic diplomacy might not survive you," he murmured. Muffin yawned. By the time the 3rd week began, the Virellans had quietly suspended all other diplomatic proceedings involving Earth. Not officially, of course there were still morning briefings and ceremonial exchanges, but everything meaningful had stalled. The cat had become an unspoken centerpiece of the interspecies agenda. Michael sat on the observation deck, legs stretched out, a lukewarm cup of Kelroot infusion in one hand. Muffin lay draped across his thighs like a weighted scarf, her tail twitching in slow, thoughtful arcs. The railings around the deck pulsed faintly with energy as the station drifted in low orbit above a pale moon with no name. A Virellan researcher named Rep approached, stepping carefully around a maintenance drone that had been immobilized and flipped upside down. Muffin's doing, apparently. Rep held a small container in both hands, translucent and slightly steaming. "I was advised she prefers warm objects," Rep said, placing the container gently on the floor. Inside sat a folded thermal blanket, freshly unsealed. "Thanks," Michael replied. "She'll ignore it until it's cold, then decide it was hers all along." Rep crouched, watching Muffin's eyes flick toward the container and away again. The Council is concluding its final review. There are concerns regarding her influence. Michael raised an eyebrow. She's not lobbying for trade agreements. She has altered protocol across 6 departments, security has been recalibrated, environmental sensors adjusted, even diplomatic etiquette has been amended. Michael sipped his drink. She also coughed up a hairball in front of a Virellan ambassador. Don't forget cultural outreach. Rep's dorsal fronds shifted uneasily. You are aware that several systems have adopted feline warning metrics into their training programs. No, but that sounds about right. He glanced down. She's a walking hazard sign with a nap schedule. Rep hesitated. There is a proposal to grant her Earth-based liaison status, unofficially. Michael blinked. You're giving my cat a job. She would not be expected to perform duties, merely to exist as an entity of influence. Michael laughed softly. You want to make her an ambassador by accident. Rep didn't respond. Muffin rose, stretched, and walked over to the thermal container. She sniffed it, circled it once, and then sat on top of it with a satisfied grunt. She accepts, Michael said. Rep stood again. There is one final matter. Medical protocol requires a complete species profile. Your feline's physiology is only partially understood. Michael frowned. You want to run tests. We require a genetic scan and full biometric data. There are anomalies in her neuromuscular patterns. She displays reaction speeds incompatible with her mass and age. Michael rubbed his forehead. She's healthy. My vet back on Earth gave her a clean bill. That may be, but our systems are calibrated for precision. We've detected a cardiovascular irregularity. He looked up sharply. What kind of irregularity? Rep paused, choosing his words. Her heart rate varies in ways inconsistent with baseline mammalian norms, spikes during stillness, drops during exertion. We would prefer to rule out neurological instability. Michael's expression shifted. She's had a murmur since she was a kitten. It never bothered her. No medication, just regular check-ins. Rep tilted his head. A congenital defect? Yeah, it's common. It means her heartbeat isn't always steady, but it's not dangerous. She just takes longer to recover from stress. Rep's fronds lifted. That explains her dormancy cycles. She's not lazy, she's conserving energy. Rep nodded slowly. That aligns with our observations. Still, a scan would confirm the absence of deterioration. Michael hesitated. She won't like it. We can perform it using a passive imaging pod, no restraint. After a moment he nodded. Fine, but I stay with her. The med lab was quieter than usual. Lights dimmed, air filtered with a faint floral compound meant to soothe. Muffin paced inside the transparent pod, tail flicking with increasing irritation. She's going to bolt, Michael warned. Priel stood beside the control panel, adjusting settings. We've disabled auditory feedback. She won't hear anything. Michael crouched beside the pod. Muffin, it's a picture. Just stand still. She stared at him, then flopped onto her side with a long sigh. The scan initiated. A soft blue hue passed over her body, grid lines flickering across her fur. Data streamed along the console in a language Michael couldn't read. After 2 minutes, the scan ended. Muffin stood up, shook herself once, and turned her back to the pod wall. Priel frowned at the display. The murmur is stable, no risk of embolic events, but there's something else. Michael stood. What? She has a scar on her hip, a healed fracture, old. Michael nodded. She fell off a balcony when she was a year old, landed wrong. Vet said she'd be stiff in the cold. Priel tapped a sequence isolating the image. There's also increased bone density, slightly above expected values. She used to jump from bookshelves. Maybe she built it up over time. Priel's eyes widened. That kind of adaptation in a domestic animal is rare. Structural reinforcement through repeated environmental challenge, voluntary. Michael crossed his arms. She's stubborn. No. She's resilient. The door opened behind them and Vellet entered, moving slower than usual. The council has reached consensus. Michael turned. Tell me it's not exile. She is to be recognized as a cultural fixture, not a threat, not a diplomat, a symbol. Michael blinked. Of what? Human adaptability. He tilted his head. She's not human. She is your creation, your companion. Her behavior reflects your species more accurately than your conduct manuals. She bends systems without breaking them. She invades without strategy. She wins by existing. Michael looked at Muffin, now curled into a tight ball inside the scan pod, eyes half closed. She's not trying to do any of that. Vellet's skin pulsed with a soft silver hue. That is precisely why it unsettles us. Priel added, we've created a new designation, passive catalyst entity. She's the first entry. Michael rubbed his jaw. So now she's in your science books, Vellet nodded. And your species has been assigned provisional unpredictability status. Michael laughed despite himself. We're being documented as erratic because of a cat, because of how you designed your lives to accommodate such beings. Michael placed a hand on the pod. She doesn't mean to cause problems. And yet she teaches us more than your diplomats. The pod door opened. Muffin stepped out, stretched, and immediately walked over to Vellet. She stared up at him, unblinking. Vellet froze. Then Muffin sat and began washing her paw. Vellet exhaled slowly. It appears I have been accepted. Careful, Michael muttered. That's how it starts. Later that evening, as they sat back on the observation deck, Muffin nestled on a fleece-lined panel beside the viewport, watching stars drift by like dust in a beam of light. Michael leaned back, arms folded behind his head. So, he said aloud, you've derailed a treaty, redefined alien psychology, and gotten your own classification. Satisfied? Muffin rolled onto her back, exposing her belly without any intention of letting it be touched. Michael grinned. That's what I thought. And for the first time in weeks, the station felt quiet again. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything that needed to happen already had.